Hey folks, welcome. In this video I'm going to do two things. One is to expand on my last video about microtonal playback. This time I'm going to use MPE data to control an external instrument. The second thing I'm going to do is to generate envelopes from a back roll to control parameters in an external instrument. So today we're going to use Max to send MIDI data to Ableton. We can use the MIDI format object like I did in the last video about microtonal playback. But this time we're going to use the MPE format as well. And that allows us to just use one instrument instead of multiple instruments. MPE format allows us to send pitch bend data to different channels separately, so that when I change the pitch bend on one channel, that will not affect pitch bend on other channels. So the MIDI format needs to be fed into the MPE format object, and the MPE format object has 16 inlets by default, one for each channel. I can connect the MIDI format to each one of the inlet, and each inlet will be directed to a different channel. To send out my MIDI, I'm going to use the back roll object, which allows us to parse the playback of a score. And in this case, I want to parse out the sense, meaning the pitch value of the note, and then the velocity and the duration. Just a reminder, the MIDI sense that back roll sends out needs to be divided by 100 in order to get the actual MIDI note. To get the pitch bend value, I can just get the fractional component of the MIDI center divided by 100. I'm going to use a poly tilde object, so I need to build a patch that will parse each note. So here I'm unjoining the four messages, which are the the pitch, the velocity, the duration, and the pitch bend. And I can join the first two to get the pitch and velocity information. Use a delay object to send a note off to the MIDI format, so that the note will be turned off whenever the duration is reached. The same process that I did in the last video about microtonal playback. And I have to create a dispoly object that will receive a 1 or a 0 depending on whether the note is on or off. So I will send a 1 to mark it as busy at the beginning, and then I will send a 0 when the note is done. I can just create a scripting process where I create an MP format object that has an argument equals to the number of voices that I have in my polytilde object. So I just create a script, new object, and then give the object MP format of a scripting name. And I can place it in the position that I like. In this case, I'm looking at the inspector to see where my object should be, copying that into the patching position attribute. And I'm going to give it a fixed width attribute so that the object will have the right width depending on its number and the number of inlets. I need to give the MIDI format a scripting name, and then the output a scripting name as well, because now I want to make sure that I create the connections that are necessary. With the script connect, I can connect different objects based on their scripting names, and I want to connect the MIDI format from its outlet 0, meaning the leftmost outlet, to the MPE format, and the inlet will depend on which voice I am operating in that instance. It's very important that if I change the patch that I'm operating on, I have to delete the object before I save it. Otherwise, it will save it with the object that is being created by the script, and this might create some duplicates. So let's start loading the subpatcher in the polytilde object and see what happens. So if I inspect the different instances of the polytilde, I can see how the voice is being created correctly. I'm going to use the MIDI note message, which allows us to target the voices, the instances in the polytilde that are not busy. Each message will be directed to the first available instance of the polytilde that is marked as free, as not busy. And the first two numbers of the MIDI note need to be the pitch and the velocity that I'm sending in, but everything after that can be whatever I want. And in this case, it's going to be the duration and the pitch bend value. I cannot use MPE for all of the MIDI instruments that I have in Ableton or in other DAWs. I need to make sure that the instrument that I'm using is MPE compatible. You will see there is a list of instruments that can be used using MPE, and there is wavetable, sampler, simpler, and arpeggiator. Let's use wavetable in this case. Let's use this instrument, and I need to make sure that I change the pitch bend value to 1, so because I'm only operating on one semitone, and I need to, very important, enable the MPE option in the preferences. Enable port 1, which is the MIDI port that I'm using. Whenever I enable the MPE option, the channels are grayed out because MPE will take care of channel allocation automatically. I enabled the tone division in the back roll to 8, so I can play quarter tones. In this case, you can hear how the lower two notes are not affected by the pitch bend of the higher E flat whenever I change it. So let's just try it with a thicker score and make sure that the polyphony is preserved. And also, I can start changing the microtonal playback to affect only the high G. You can hear how only the high G is affected. The lower notes are kept intact. The second challenge I have today is to create envelopes for each different note and have that envelope affect some parameter in the playback. So I can have, for instance, a filter cutoff being controlled by the envelope. And of course, that parameter should only affect the note to which the envelope is attached to and not anything else. So for that, I'm going to use the slot capabilities of the back roll, meaning the ability to create envelopes graphically onto each note, which is a very cool feature of the back roll object. And to do that, I can have like a similar parsing that I have had before, but I'm going to add the slot 2, which is my graphical envelope interface in Backroll. I want the output to be readable by Max for the first three values, meaning the sense, the velocity, and the duration, but I don't want the last one to be translated into a list. I'm going to have an out attribute that is MMM for the first three values, and then N for native for the last value. And now I'm going to create a poly tilde subpatch, and I'm gonna give it a name, and I'm gonna have something very similar what I had before, but I'm going to add another element to the list, to the unjoin. The slot to line object does what you imagine it does, which is taking the envelope that I drawn into the slot, into the score of the score, and translate it into a function that is readable by the line tilde object. It takes the duration of the envelope from the first, from the leftmost inlet, and then the list from the slot on the second inlet. And I can also give it a default value in case it gets a null value. Now I'm going to send this value from the line tilde object to the CC inlet of the MIDI format. So the CC inlet of the MIDI format expects two values. One is the CC index that I'm using, the control change index that I'm using, and the second one is the value itself. So I want to go over to Ableton, where I'm going to map CC values to parameters in the instrument that I'm using. First of all, I need to disable the MPE, and then I want to make sure that the remote attribute is enabled so I can do the mapping correctly. And then I'm going to map to have each instrument set on a different channel, because in this case I want to have each one of the instances in the poly assigned to a different channel. So I need to select the MIDI, enable MIDI mapping on the top right, which will highlight the parameters that can be automated by an external MIDI controller. I'm going to manually select the parameter I want to map, and then move the slider in my max patch, see how the mapping is being received by Ableton. So I hope this was helpful. Feel free to ask questions in the comments, like the video, subscribe, and until the next time, take care.